So we have Sophie presenting leveraging empathy. She's the Senior Manager of Strategic Insights and VOC at the SCIM. Now, Sophie, I can stop sharing.
Thank you for the intro. I'm sorry that I dove in twice in one morning, actually. I'm really enthusiastic. So today I'll be talking about how leveraging empathy can help drive insights forward, really focusing on how fostering trust with research participants opens up new possibilities. Thank you, Elena, for the short introduction. I'm Sophie Riese. I'm the Senior Manager of Strategic Insights and Voice of the Customer at the SCIM. And I'm a social scientist and a Voice of the Customer leader for product and brand. I've actually founded and grown research and insights organizations at 2 mid-stage startups. I have over 10 years of experience in the product and research industry, working with B2C and B2B companies in a variety of sectors, including finance, family law, health and wellness, media, and education. And so I really do have a lot of experience speaking with people on extremely sensitive topics where empathy plays a major role in being able to derive insights. So this is really about laying the groundwork for successful and impactful moderated research. I'm not really going to talk about at the very end how you may want to present those insights to your own team. Really more focusing on how a lot of preparation and setup can be done to facilitate those insights at the end. And this approach may ask you to throw away a lot of what you know today about qualitative research, because we are often taught to be very objective. And I think with these more sensitive topics, that level of objectivity does not always serve the research needs. So we're going to be talking about practicing empathy, the importance of preparation, really setting the stage for success, giving participants your full attention. And then I'll talk about some examples where I really found unintended insights as participants shared things with me. So empathy is the practice of sharing another person's feelings. Unlike sympathy, where you are sort of acknowledging how someone is feeling, empathy is really about bringing it into yourself and finding that moment of connection and feeling it yourself. It is an absolutely vital part of qualitative research, and in my experience, it is necessary for a healthy business cycle. But for a lot of people, it doesn't come naturally, and challenges to empathy can include limitations in your own experience. So we're often speaking with participants who don't have the same background as us or the same lived experience as us, and it can be quite difficult sometimes to overcome that. And of course, with that is the inability to connect if you don't have those similarities or maybe some shared relationships. And then, you know, I'm going to come back to this throughout the presentation, but it really does require 100% of your attention, and that can be extremely difficult, especially if you have very limited resources, you're a team of one, but there are lots of other barriers as well. And developing empathy takes a lot of practice. This is, of course, something that should be applied in your research, but making it a part of your daily life is going to really help you throughout the work. So things like listening more than you speak and asking a lot of questions, not making assumptions about the person before you hear from them, looking out for emotional cues. So changes in their physical demeanor, changes in their tone of voice, maybe facial cues can be really helpful. And again, of course, putting yourself in their shoes. Empathy is really about making that connection, bringing it in. And so those moments of connections where you can find them are really valuable. Again, like I had said, this may really push you to think outside of what you do today in your qualitative research. The right preparation is everything. It makes it much easier to engage with users, and it sets participants up to be much more open from the get-go. So it may seem obvious, but it's often overlooked. The best way to ensure that interviews go smoothly and that participants feel comfortable is by setting your study up to do so from the start. This means that at every touch point, you are being extremely clear about what you are hoping to learn from a participant and also what they can expect from you. So how is your recruitment and screener done? Is that something you're doing yourself or with a coordinator or an outside firm? You want to lay the groundwork from the very beginning of the project to make sure that you have alignment throughout. In my team, we try to keep things fairly general in our recruitment emails and screeners. But once participants get to the booking page, we get extremely specific about expectations for participants. Are they going to need to share their screen? Are they going to, will we want their video on? Do we want them to be in a specific space or something like that? All of that needs to be laid out from the get-go so that when they're signing up, they know what we are expecting to do. And in the confirmation email, in the calendar event we send out, we reiterate all of the expectations. And of course, let participants know that they can cancel or reschedule at any time if they need. We typically run projects over a series of weeks, which also allows for flexibility in participant schedules. Of course, as the prior presenter said, speed is always of the essence to our stakeholders. So sometimes that's not really possible, but in that case, I try to plan far in advance and maybe recruit people more than a few weeks out, and then just set follow-up touch points until the call takes place. On my team, we do try to automate everything, but even if you're not able to, the most important thing is making sure you're communicating with participants in advance in the way that you say you will and when you say you will. So if you say that they'll receive an email from you with follow-up instructions for how to join the call or how to set up their space, especially important if you're doing maybe a remote UX test, do that when you say you will and with at least 24 hours notice. This also allows you to confirm that the time still works. And getting off on the right foot really starts with practice. Practice, practice, practice. Of course, it makes you more comfortable, and it just allows you to be much more natural when you're speaking with participants. Best practice is, of course, always to have a note taker or an observer with you. If you're in person, that may be quite obvious unless you have a very fancy setup. It may be quite obvious to a participant, but if you're on a phone call or if you're doing a video call, it's important to let the participant know that there is an observer or a note taker so that they know who's on the call. And especially when you're dealing with difficult topics where a participant may not want to be recorded, that note taker plays a much more important role. And so again, planning in advance really helps. It's not just a valuable form of documentation, but also frees you up to give your full attention to the participant. Let participants know someone is there. Let them know how their insights will be used. Some of the examples that I'll get to later in the presentation, before people shared with me, they wanted to double check that, their voice, their face would never be shared because these were very personal things that they were telling me, and being able to confidently confirm that for participants, but also starting the call with that is very helpful. And again, reminding participants that they can opt out. That could be from a specific question or from the test on a whole. They are not obligated to give you anything. Even if you are incentivizing it, even if you are offering them something, they owe you nothing. They are doing something for you. And then lastly, I think it's always important to start the session with an icebreaker or a series of getting to know you questions, even if you already have that information about the participant. So if in the screener, they provided you information about their family dynamics or where they live, asking those at the beginning of the call to just get comfortable, get to know each other, it can really come in handy later. And then this one is super uncomfortable. No one likes to watch themselves. Definitely the worst part of qualitative research is having to play your own voice back to yourself like 1,000 times. But if you've scheduled a video call, even if the participant doesn't turn on their camera, you should keep yours on. This really builds trust and rapport, especially because it's easy for participants to see that you are giving them your full attention. And we go into these projects with specific expectations. However, listening carefully and listening actively, leaning into moments of silence, and being responsive to the direction participants take the conversation, because that's really what it is, a conversation, allows you to find the heart. The best insights I find often come under the surface with questions that maybe I wouldn't have thought to ask. Of course, most of us have been there, moderating or observing a research interview, and the participant just doesn't want to share. It doesn't matter that you did all the preparation, you laid all the groundwork, you set the expectations, and whatever question you're asking, you're getting just a single word answer, or they're really taking you so far off topic that you're not even sure how you're going to bring it back. Starting with the perspective that these moments themselves are moments of insight can be really helpful. You wrote a script, but how can you get relevant information from where they're taking the conversation? What does it tell you that they signed up, but they don't seem to want to be having this conversation? Was there something that they mentioned during that kind of getting to know you, rapport building part at the beginning of the conversation that you can follow up on? Conveying genuine interest and empathy can open up a lot of doors. Maybe there was something that they said that's true for you too. Can you connect with them at that level? Of course, like I said, objectivity is important, but this level of connection and relationship building is really valuable. And you only have a short amount of time with participants, maybe 30 minutes or 45 minutes. And so building that rapport really quickly is going to help you derive the most valuable insights. If your session is about the messaging of, say, a wellness campaign that you're going to run, and they haven't been talking about wellness at all, you can't get them to answer the questions, but they mentioned traveling to visit their mother for the first time in 3 years when you asked if they're looking forward to something in the next few months, that is the insight. What can you follow up on? What can you learn more about? What has prevented them from visiting their mother? How frequently are they in contact? What are they most looking forward to there? There is a wellness story there. There is an opportunity for connection. There is a way to find out how to serve that participant. And if you're really at a loss, go back to the beginning, circle back, ask questions again. Remaining neutral is important, but it's not the most important thing. So I grew up in New York City, and I lived just a few blocks from the World Trade Center on 9/11. As a result, I have been part of a longitudinal health and well-being study for over 20 years. Each quarter, when the researchers get in touch to set up a time to speak, I feel myself just physically tense up. Why? Because the conversation is actually a survey from which there is absolutely no deviation. It takes anywhere from an hour and a half to 3 hours to complete the conversation. Sometimes it's on the phone, sometimes it's in person, and it drives me absolutely nuts. Since it's just a survey, can't they send it to me so I can complete it on my own time on my computer? Yes, it would be long, but given that the moderator learns nothing outside of the exact answers to the questions she's asking, typically posed on a 3 or 5 point scale, why does it need to be done by phone or in person? It's important to reach your research goals, but qualitative research is not just about ticking a box. And if that's all you're doing, there are better ways to gather that information from your participants. Qualitative research is really about learning about the why, the motivations, the frustrations, the reasons for the behaviors and the beliefs. And in my experience, it's often when we go off script that we learn the most, because as I said before, we may not be asking the right questions. Leaning into the silence. There was supposed to be a little cricket sound. But leaning into the silence is another thing that's very uncomfortable, but very important, especially for those more reticent participants. You really want to be able to leave that moment, give them space, let them collect themselves, and see if they're open to offering up something else. So over the last 7 years, I have heard some really unexpected things during sessions. And that's why it's important to be practicing. And it's also important to make sure how you can make a participant feel heard. These comments are just a couple of things that I've heard over the years, and frequently they're kind of, but not exactly on the topic. So how can I both achieve my research objectives and make the participant comfortable? Like for reluctant participants or the tangent followers, I start by finding the nugget, the insight in what they are willing to share. This woman that I spoke to, whose husband had died the day before, this was an interview that was really about risk. And obviously, this was not a woman who was prepared to talk about risk, both because of her immediate situation and because she had never considered financial risk before. Although she did have an account with us, her husband had set it up for her and she had never logged in. So immediately after joining the call, when she started telling us about her husband, about her concerns, this was not a time to redirect to the strict script that I had written. This was a time to lean in, to make her feel heard, and to follow up, to see how we could best help her. She's so unsettled. She's had this massive, unexpected life moment. What can we do as a product, as a service, to make her feel supported, seen, and comfortable? That's honestly a pretty big ask from an investment platform. But what we were really able to do here is leave the test with a whole new set of ideas that members of our team maybe hadn't even considered before, because we were so focused on thinking about risk and tax strategies and less about what happens when someone dies and they haven't set a beneficiary. How do we ensure that a loved one can take over the account in an appropriate way? What educational tools did we have for those people who maybe had never dealt with finances before, had never thought about an investment before? And this other guy, I mean, losing half of your retirement funds by stock picking is terrifying. This was also about risk, so obviously he's much more on point. But this was not someone who was 30 or 40. This was a man who was in his early 60s, and his wife was starting to ask when they were going to be able to retire. Risk and confidence obviously were the base level for what he was talking about. But as I was developing customer personas for the investment platform, this guy really stuck in my head, this idea of the gambler who lives for the thrill. And when we were speaking with him, I really dug into what it was that he gets from that feeling of gambling. And were there guardrails, or were there, again, pieces of education that we could offer this type of investor so that they could both gamble and secure their futures? I recently ran a study about parenting resources for millennial women. And again, I was gifted the opportunity to speak with so many women who wanted to talk about so much more than just the tools and resources they rely on as mothers today. This woman who has a friend who never yells, for From just this moment in the interview, I could infer a number of things about the type of content and support she might find valuable and the type of community that might be beneficial for her. She's really struggling not only with the adult relationship, but also with the child relationship. Her child and this woman's child are very close friends. And so she really was struggling not only with how to have the adult relationship with her adult friend, but how to make sure that her child could continue this relationship without seeing, a negative impact on her. And the biggest thing is always to remain engaged and calm. Overreacting to something a participant says risks ensuring that they will shut down. And re-engaging with things that they've already said is super valuable. So don't harp on the crazy thing. I've had people tell me that they think about tripping their elderly parent down the stairs. Unless it's an actual thing, then you obviously need to report it. But people are really opening up and they are providing opportunity for you. If you're in person or on video, keeping your face calm and reflecting empathy back while leaving silence for them to continue or move on is extremely important. If you're on the phone, signal that you're listening using vocal cues while leaving that same space. So overall, I think my key takeaway here is to step out of your comfort zone and really put yourself in the participant's shoes. Empathy is the most important thing of this type of work. It paves the way for great insights. Practicing helps you be prepared for any situation, any direction that the conversation goes. And leaving your preconceptions behind can help you be more responsive and empathetic with the participants. Accept the discomfort in all its forms, whether that's the silence or things that people say or, being alone on camera. It's important to accept the discomfort. As researchers, we have to take that on so that participants can feel more comfortable. And then lastly, it is all about the heart. My favorite thing in presentations, and unfortunately I wasn't able to do it here because of privacy, but I love going back to the team or executive leadership with clips from videos or clips from tests where they can really also start to develop this personal relationship with the participants and think about how we can serve her beyond the most tactical things that we're thinking of on our roadmap to drive our business and our brand forward. And that's it. Questions? Sorry.
So we do have one question already. If anyone else wants to put some questions in the chat or in the Q&A chat.
This is a really awesome question.
I
don't know if you want to read it. Yeah.
Sometimes when qualitative research is done really well, it can end up being almost too compelling. How do you balance getting key insights with rich detail, but also avoid using low-end data to inform massive decisions?
This is a really, really good question and something that I talk about with teams frequently. Qualitative research is so incredibly valuable and it can sometimes feel too compelling, but it really needs to be paired with other types of work. So for example, can we do a large scale survey and then use the survey as the launching point for the qualitative research? And that way, when we are talking about the low end data, or we are talking about, of course, with stakeholders, the question often comes up, are 10 interviews really enough? Can we make a decision here? And we should never be making a decision purely on the insights generated from this qualitative interview set, but we should be using this data to flesh out and make the other data really compelling. So that can be a survey, that can be the operational data that you're gathering from your platform, and how can we tie it all together to ensure that we are really telling one cohesive story that is not overly led by a single type of data.
So the next question we have is, how do you manage taking notes and remembering key moments of the interviews without interrupting the interview experience?
So this can be quite tricky. It is one of the reasons that I think having a note taker is so valuable. And I occasionally actually ask multiple people to be note takers on calls so that I can get different perspectives. I always keep a little notepad just next to my computer, or if I'm in a testing setup, next to me. And I will tell people in advance, like, you may see me taking a quick note, but that's just so that I don't forget something I want to follow up on. And what we also do is, for any observers, or if I have secondary note takers, I typically send around like a Google form or something afterwards and ask all of the observers to share with me their key moments from the interviews, so that as I'm working on the analysis and the reporting, I am really taking in all of the moments that different stakeholders and different observers thought were really valuable. We all are there to listen for different things because of our different roles in the company. We're all thinking about different things, and so things may stick out to us, that are valuable to you. I never thought of it, and now that I know it's valuable to you, I can go back. If there is a recording, I do always listen to the recording again and take extra notes. It's of course not always available to you, but if you do have that option, I typically listen at about 1.4 speed, just because otherwise it takes too long and I hate hearing my voice recorded back, but I find that really helpful. Another thing you can do is create like a spreadsheet for yourself in advance, where you have the kind of key questions that you'd like to answer, and you can just jot down either the time in the interview or a couple of words that you heard that fit in that box as you're going through.
When you have a recalcitrant respondent, how often do you end the interview early? And then how do you make that transition to end the interview early?
Yeah, definitely. It's always disappointing, but sometimes you really do have to. And in that case, because I have laid the groundwork, I do make sure to at least touch on everything that I said we were going to touch on in the interview. But if we're really getting nothing, then at a certain point, I will say, thank you so much. I have asked all of the questions that I have for you today. Is there anything you'd like to ask me, or any follow-up you might have? And then just end the call that way. I also let people know, even though I'm not typically doing a lot of the recruitment, I let people know that they do have my email address and that they can follow up with me at another time if that's better for them. And I frequently receive emails from participants after the call with something that they didn't feel comfortable sharing at that time, or that they've thought of afterwards because of something that happened in their lives. And I'm able to leverage those additional data points to drive forward. And that's actually frequently with reluctant respondents. I'll get a short email afterwards. Oh, I thought of this. Hopefully that's helpful. But yeah, it's always a bummer when you have to do that.
We have a couple questions from the YouTube stream also. So if you have an observer on a call with you, should they have their camera on as well?
So actually, although I've spent so much time talking about keeping your own camera on, I do suggest keeping observer cameras off. I think, especially because observers are typically not researchers, especially if you're in a much smaller research organization, they may not be as practiced as you, and it can be also quite distracting for participants to see them, typing notes away or whatever. And, over the last few years, I've tried a wide variety of video tools, some which allow you to hide observers, some like Zoom, where it's much harder to hide observers. And, in the end, things like Zoom, where more people are used to using the tool, but where you're less able to, say, hide the number of observers or something, it can be all the more important just to let people know that people will be joining the call, but they'll be keeping their cameras and their mics off. I always have a side Slack or a side chat going so that an observer or note taker can let me know if they have a follow-up question that maybe I didn't think of, or if I've kind of missed something along the way.
So this is kind of a part two to that question. So if you do not have a note taker available, what's good practice in letting the participant know that you're using a tool to record notes?
So I know that the requirements vary state by state. I do live in New York, where under all circumstances, you're not only legally required to tell people if you're recording them, but most tools will actually create some kind of audio or visual notification, which can be very helpful. So I build it into the script, and I always say, my general intro, what we're going to be talking about. And if I don't have a note taker observer, I will say, for ease and so that I can give you all of my attention, I'd like to record the session if that's okay with you. I am very clear about what will be done with the recording. It will be stored in, a private internal server, and clips may be shared with stakeholders, but nothing will ever be public. And I then, if they accept, then I turn on the recording device. Otherwise, if not, I will let them know that I will need to be taking notes as we're speaking. And so, hopefully that won't negatively impact the conversation, but that it may take me a moment to respond or to follow up.
And then I think this is our last question that we have. When you're thinking about empathy, do you use different moderators to fit the demos of the respondents so they can be as empathetic as possible?
I definitely try to. There is a line between empathetic and tokenization, so being very conscious of that. And of course, sometimes you don't have that option available to you. You may be resource constrained, or your team may not be very diverse. And in that case, it really does come down to all of the practices that I talked about, where finding ways to use language, to use other types of connection to make people a little bit more comfortable. And occasionally, if I know that there may be something unique in the situation, so for example, I was speaking with a number of Black women about the barriers that they face accessing healthcare. That's something where going in, I actually said in a very upfront way that I am aware that as a white woman, I may not be aware of or face the barriers that they face. And so through the conversation, it's as much about hearing them as it is about learning from them. And I do a lot more follow-up in that case, where I'll say, I'm hearing you say XYZ, and I wanted to learn more about this so that we can solve for Y.
Awesome. Thank you, Sophie. I think if no one else has any other questions, then that is it.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm also available on LinkedIn and everything, so feel free to connect.